Fallout is changing. With the TV show, there's people who haven't played the games, and even with the games, there's people who haven't played the original games. You might not know this, but the Master is largely responsible for Fallout's success as a franchise. People will argue if the best games were made by Bethesda or Interplay, but no matter who makes the game, every single Fallout game lives in the shadow of this, the ultimate villain. Plus, everything in Fallout actually comes from this villain and the concepts around it. So, for those who are new to Fallout, they won't be able to fully appreciate the franchise without understanding where it all began. At the end of this video, you will know where the monsters and mutants in Fallout came from, who the overall villains of the series are, and who the potential, sometimes, heroes are. Or at least where they came from. So, if you're a Fallout veteran, hopefully this video can clear up some misunderstandings in the lore, and if you're new to the franchise, welcome. Hopefully, the world of Fallout makes a little more sense after you watch this. And for everyone, thanks for watching. I love Fallout, and I want to make the lore a little more clear for everyone. This video is about the Master, I promise. He's the first in any contest about supervillains, and his plan has repeated over and over again throughout the franchise. But in order to start the story correctly, you have to begin at the beginning, which is the Mariposa military base. Before the Great War, a company called Westech, who was,
Westech. It's a defense contractor.
Oh, I'm very familiar with you guys. You designed the T-45 power armor.
When they weren't developing that, they were also working on a project called the Pan Immunity Viron. They were testing it in secret, but when they had some breakthrough success, the Department of Defense couldn't have any secrets on the project getting out to our enemy, China. So they moved the team under the command of Colonel Robert Speidel and Captain Roger Maxson to take a team of soldiers and oversee the development of the project at the newly constructed Mariposa military base. On October 10th, 2077, the soldiers stationed at the base discovered that the scientists were conducting their experiments on human subjects, military prisoners at that. The colonel locked himself in his office like a moron! But luckily our hero, Captain Maxson, sprang into action, stopping the soldiers from murdering the scientists and instead ordering that the scientists be interrogated. Robert Anderson was the chief researcher and the first to be interrogated. He said he was only following orders, and he was working for the military just like Maxson. Maxson didn't believe that the government had authorized, let alone ordered, such experiments, and when he said as much, the researcher started spazzing out. When the researcher started his screaming, Maxson killed him outright. Just like any good hero, Captain Maxson was there to stop the soldiers from murdering the scientists so he could do it himself for the massive XP gain. Now, when Maxson decided to talk to his superior officer, Colonel Speidel killed himself in his office when Maxson broke in. He was trying to get orders from the colonel so that he would know what to do, but I guess the colonel had other plans. Weirdly enough, the interrogation from earlier repeated itself, with Maxson just murdering each scientist one by one after interrogating them. This continued until October 20th. Captain Maxson declared himself and his unit in full succession from the government, using Mariposa's communication systems to ask the US government what was going on. The comms stayed silent. On October 22nd, he ordered that his soldiers' families come and shelter with them at the Mariposa military base. And of course, on October 23rd, 2077, we all know what happened. Or maybe you don't. Either way, the war with China went nuclear, and the government would never respond to Maxson's questions. Mariposa, being a military base of some importance, was built with the end in mind and in total secrecy. For this reason, the containment held true when the United States was hit by nuclear fire. Mariposa and the inhabitants were spared the horrors of nuclear devastation, and for 2 days, they sheltered in the military base. On October 25th, one of Maxson's sergeants volunteered to take a reading of the surface and reported that there was not a significant amount of radiation outside. Maxson and his Brotherhood buried the scientists outside the base and left on October 27th. So that's the end of Maxson's contribution to the story, but not the end of the Mariposa military base in Fallout. I'm going to make a video next week where I lay out whether or not Maxson was a hero and tell the rest of the lore around the Brotherhood of Steel. But let's get back on topic. Why is that all important in regards to the Master? Well, let me ask you something. what was the Pan Immunity Barren project? As stated before, it was research started in 2073 into biochemical weapons to use against China. In a strange twist of fate, the United States produced viruses against China instead of in real life, where China develops. At first, this viron was mostly defensive, attempting to prevent people from being killed by the new plague of 2055, which is something in Fallout lore we'll get to at some point. But when the administration of the experimental viron resulted in increased muscle mass and quick, life-saving healing, in addition to resistance to radiation, disease, and old age, Westtech took over the project, moved into Mariposa, and named it the Forced Evolutionary Virus. From now on, I'm going to call that the FEV. And they began focusing on using it on humans. The name wasn't just for show. The viron literally forces anything it touches to evolve. In a perfect case, it would make the host stronger, smarter, faster, and pretty much better in every single way. In the process, however, it also breaks down your DNA, making new DNA, and destroys your ability to spread your genes. This is obviously not an even trade because I spend most of my life trying to find ways to spread my genes. And if I could live a little bit longer but not be able to spread my genes, I'd probably just end my life right there. In other words, the scientists at Mariposa were taking military prisoners from their blocks and exposing them to the forced evolutionary virus and changing them into what we call super mutants, meaning mutants that are even better than a regularly mutated organism. Not to get too into the weeds here, but our DNA has a double helix, so when they do that, the two strands that combine to form our genetic makeup gets destroyed, and the FEV breaks it down to form a quad helix, meaning 4 strands of DNA. It changes every aspect of your life and is extremely painful. In other words, you can't remember anything from before it because all you remember is the pain. And then when you're done, you have an entirely new set of DNA. It's arguable that what you're actually doing is killing the organism and making a brand new organism in its stead. After all, how much of you is still you if your DNA changes? Every single monster and mutant in all of Fallout is a result of this or similar experiments. This guy? Yeah, FEV. This little girl right here? FEV. This cute thing? That's right, FEV. So after Maxon buries those scientists, he leaves the base and seals it up, turning on security on October 27th, 2077. And he goes on to turn his ragtag group of soldiers into what we would call the Brotherhood of Steel, these guys, as seen in every single Fallout game and even in the show. Over time, the base would fall into slight disrepair, and animals would find their way inside, exposing themselves to the FEV and growing into horrors unrecognizable from their original selves. Now, let's turn to the star of our show. Some of you might already know this, but the Master's story really begins in a place called Vault 8, and about a man that was actually named Richard Moriu. Moriu? Moriu. Vault 8 was a control vault, so it didn't have any experiments done on it. It opened pretty soon after the war in 2092, becoming a widely successful vault city. And Richard was banished not long after the opening for murder. We don't know the details of this murder, but he did it, and he was punished for it by being cast out. He made his way to a city called the Hub, became a doctor, and changed his last name to become Richard Gray. I'm guessing he did this to hide his murder to anyone who might know who he was, but we can't entirely rule out that he didn't run across a copy of this book and wanted to find himself a submissive.
Richard Gray.
The Hub was a huge city in Fallout 1 and 2 and presumably other games and shows. And like any large city, there's a lot of trade that goes on. So the caravans were probably some of his best customers due to their dangerous work, going back and forth over the wasteland. Eventually, Richard becomes friends with one of the caravan leaders. Not a submissive girl named Anna, but actually a dude named Harold, who wanted to stop the mutant threat that was taking the lives of so many caravaneers. Really quick, Harold came out of a place called Vault 29 and can recall what his life was like before the war. That's how long he's been alive. I'm going to play some clips of Harold telling his story, and I want you to notice that what we're about to talk about has left him completely mutated and pretty much unrecognizable as a human.
Now,
After the Great War, my vault was one of the first to open. Phew, long time. All started with the sirens. I was young, but oh, I do remember that. A lot of terrible years followed, and I remember walking out of the vault late one morning.
You as the player can ask him why he would leave his vault, and he says,
Well, I was a trader. Did pretty good making a circuit between survivors. Lost a lot of good people, though.
So, while Richard had leveraged his vault education and his willingness to cut people up into a promising career as a doctor, Harold became a trader. He had a problem, though. While trading has always been useful, it started to get harder and harder for him because his workers kept dying because...
Gangers got him. Scavengers attacking the caravans, and mutant son of a dog if they weren't springing up like rabbits with a mission. Had to have an army of guards with just to do a deal.
And to add to the problem, he said the mutants were coming from...
everywhere. Hell, seemed like you couldn't fart without hitting one. But mostly in the northwest.
So, with so many mutants around, Harold decided he would need to put a stop to them if he was ever going to make any money from trading ever again. So, he gathered a couple friends, and wouldn't you know it, he turned to his good friend Richard Gray to help out on the expedition as the doctor. He says,
We mounted an expedition. God, Richard Gray led a small group of us up there.
And if you press him for details, he goes on,
Richard Gray was a doctor. A little older than me, and friend was he smart. He found the source.
By source, he means the Mariposa
military base. We lost a lot of folks getting in there. Because it was like someone went bargain shopping at Mutant Land. Cheaper by the dozens. Can't figure any other reason except that being the factory. We got pretty far inside. Wasn't a lot of us left by then. Gray, me, and a couple of others. One of them robots got Francine. Mark was wounded. Sent him back to the surface. Then it was just me and Gray. To this day, I don't know. He never made it back here, and, well, I couldn't face the wasteland again, so I never looked. We made it to some sort of central core, like a plant of some sort. That's when it happened. A robot crane crashed into us. Last I saw Gray, he was flying through the air and into some sort of acid bath. I was in bad shape and, well, I passed out.
Harold doesn't even remember how he got out himself. He just says,
Well, I have no idea. Woke up in the wasteland, barely hanging on. Got lucky, and some traders I knew found me days later. Good thing, since I was already changing. They brought me here, and here I've been since.
Together, Richard and Harold took a crew to stop the mutant threat in 2102, 25 years after Maxon left. They discovered the Mariposa military base on June 23rd and sustained heavy casualties from the mutants and security robots. Harold and Richard ended up being the only survivors, and they managed to reach the secret that lay within the military base. So what did they find in the secret basement? Well, like Harold says, Richard was hit by a crane used to dip people into these huge vats of FEV, and Harold's last recollection was seeing Richard Gray fall into the vats completely. These vats were clearly made for mass use, and judging by the look of them, they are even big enough to fit one or perhaps two of your mom inside of them. Richard floated in the FEV for days, but regained consciousness and managed to pull himself out of the vat, where he lay for no one knows how long, in a kind of fugue state between life and death. It seems the only thing that kept him alive during this time was an audio journal he kept. You, the player, can find a transcript of this diary. I'm going to read it here, but I'm leaving a lot out just for the sake of time. The first thing it says is, I'm dying. I need to get this down before the pain overwhelms me. Then another entry. I can't believe I was finally able to drag myself out of that vat. I nearly drowned. I don't know what happened to Harold. He was standing right next to me when the crane knocked me into the vat. He must have been killed, or he would have tried to help me. Then, I have no idea how much time has passed. I was able to hack the computers to turn off the robots and record this, but now my mind is slipping away. There is much pain. Then, the green slime that I was immersed in is the source of all the mutations we trace to here. My skin is starting to fester and peel. In other areas, it is bubbling and expelling a green mucus-like substance. Some days, the pain is almost tolerable. Then, I can actually walk a few steps again. It seems inconceivable that I dragged myself all the way up here from that vat. Strangely, I'm actually feeling stronger, though I'm still in a lot of pain. Everything seems to be getting smaller. Now, taking a break, to this point, Richard goes from denial about the FEV even affecting him to being in an incredible amount of pain for a long time, to realizing his skin is literally turning green and falling off. What happens next is even more disheartening. He says, I think I consumed one of the mutated things scurrying around here today. Before I knew what was happening, some sort of tendril had sprung from my stomach and covered the poor creature. As soon as it had sucked the rodent into my gut, I could actually feel its mind, I think. There's a very real possibility that I'm going slowly insane and can no longer differentiate between what is real and what is a hallucination. Then he says, things are becoming more clear to me every day. This toxin has actually improved my mind. I feel that I can understand even the most complex philosophical questions simply and directly. It's as if all the layers of artifice have been stripped away. I wonder what would happen if I submerged an animal in the vats for a prolonged period of time. Would it gain awareness? So here we see the beginnings of Richard turning into something more. He certainly thought a lot of himself if he's using words like artifice. Whatever the FEV did to him, it added a consciousness to him. Something outside of his control consumed the first living thing to get too close. What's more, Richard could feel the consciousness of that thing that it consumed within him after it was consumed. So naturally, he started to experiment more. He says, the strangest thing is happening to the animals. They actually become smarter and more aware of their surroundings. I dipped a dog and a rat at the same time today, and they were fused together. It's not quite two creatures anymore, but it's more than one. Perhaps this is the future, a coming together of different creatures in some sort of harmonious unity. I no longer consume the different animals I create simply for sustenance. I have become the instrument through which unity will be achieved. I am so much more than a human being now. Then he says, a lost soul has finally strayed into my home. I was so surprised that I consumed him before dipping, a mistake I shall not make again. His mind was so primitive as to be repulsive to my refined, cognitive abilities. Then, I've begun to modify myself to be more pleasing to the Unity by injecting small doses of the virus into my body. The slime in the vats is a man-made virus called the Forced Evolutionary Virus. This information was acquired from my newly grown Neuralink with the base's computer. Okay, pause. Now, this is what I think a lot of people get wrong. There have been many videos over the years about the Master, and all of them are good. But the misconception is about who the Master is. He says, I've begun to modify myself to be more pleasing to the Unity. And that begs the question, just where does Richard end and the Unity begin? If the Unity is another consciousness that kept Richard alive by eating rats in the dark, who's really in charge? When the Unity consumed a lost soul, who's to say that that guy isn't the one in charge? Is Richard really the one steering this thing? Or is the FEV itself conscious? It's not really spelled out, but it is more complicated than Richard becomes the Master and then becomes the Unity. Anyways, getting back to his diary. He says, the few wanderers that have found their way here have been a disappointment to me. They can't seem to mutate correctly. The best I've been able to create are some big and dumb mutants. Most can recall nothing from before I initiated them into the wondrous Unity. I only feed on them for fuel now. Their minds are nothing to me. Then he says, I have succeeded in spreading the complete joy of unification to another soul. Unlike the others, his total radiation count was low. I believe this is the factor we have been overlooking all this time, as it seems the conversion was more successful in the cases with less radiation damage. I have never known such glory as I felt when taking his mind into our own. See how he refers to himself as we now. Then in another entry he says, "We are beginning to create an army dedicated to unifying the wonderful diversity of life. We have trained them to continue our work here while we search out a more populated area to take into ourselves. We are beginning to feel the limitations of a body that is mobile. We must find a permanent home, with a greater store of knowledge and a steady supply of biomass." Then finally, the journal ends with, "We have stopped increasing ourselves until we can find this new unification chamber. When we have arrived, we will continue to grow and feed until we have brought peace and unity to the entire world." And so that was his plan. Let's just recap for a minute. Richard was kept alive by a force outside his control that he took to calling the Unity. He learned that creatures dipped by themselves would become smarter and better, and dipping more than one at a time would make them into one creature working together. The same held true for humans, and the less exposed to radiation someone was, the greater the effects of the dipping. With each dip, the new creature's consciousness would add to the consciousness of Richard. He even managed to combine his knowledge with computers, and did so with the database at Mariposa, learning everything that the scientists had learned before the war. At this point, I think it's safe to say that Richard was gone. He was officially the master. It's not clear where the master begins and the Unity ends, or who is who, but I think that's a topic for another day. For now, he knew how to make prime supermutants that would aid him in his plans for bringing the Unity to the entire world. Between the master and his collective consciousness, they were able to better target people to turn into supermutants and add to the Unity, until one of them, who would later be known as the Lieutenant, and we'll talk about him in a minute, realized the problem wasn't just the radiation itself. The discovery is literally what makes Fallout Fallout. The Lieutenant figured out that
the FEV was mutated by the war radiation. Those living in this desolate wasteland have been exposed to this mutant FEV, essentially inoculating them from the full effects.
See, before the military stepped in to produce FEV at the Mariposa military base, WestTech was developing on their own in what place that's called the NBC division. When the bomb struck this place directly, some portion of the forced evolutionary virus was vaporized and cycled through the nuclear fallout process around the facility for hundreds of miles. This acted as a kind of inoculation against the full force of FEV. Just to make it clear, if you imagine FEV was, say, the flu, then mutation into a prime supermutant would be the equivalent of becoming a host to the flu virus. In the same way, being exposed to the air around Mariposa military base, and eventually everywhere, was like receiving a flu shot. A weakened version of the virus would be consumed by the host, and the full effects of the regular virus could not take effect, except in extreme circumstances. People alive outside the vaults around Mariposa became ghouls rather than dying. They were partially mutated by the FEV. People alive further away were mutated only in slight ways. Only people who were not exposed at all, say by living in a vault and having an air filter around them, could be turned into a prime supermutant. People who are already a little bit of a mutant, like, I don't know, your sister, could be nice to look at, but the second they get too close to the master's goo, they turn large and dumb rather than smarter. The same is true for animals and bugs and everything else. That's why I say this event is what makes Fallout Fallout. Otherwise, everyone would just get cancer and die depressed and alone, kind of like real life, but in this game, they change into a brand new creature. So back to the story, they continued adding supermutants to their force for 30 years, resulting in a numerically small but fierce force that would continually look for new, untouched people. In 2130, there was a particularly fierce winter, and people were more scarce than ever. In addition, finding the ideal specimen who was not exposed to radiation was quite a bit harder. The next year, they decided to look in earnest for new subjects, directly raiding entire human settlements and taking all the people and then deciding who could be assimilated into the Unity or turned into a slave. Their success was limited in terms of success per person, but it still resulted in exponential increase in new supermutants for the Master. Eventually, the Unity found a cult who agreed to represent Unity's interests in exchange for power in the surrounding areas. By 2152, Unity was using unaltered humans in the wastes to act as a public face for the Unity and quietly take human subjects in secret to be assimilated. This cult was called the Children of the Cathedral and gave medical care to the Wastelanders as a cover for snatching people off the streets. Their leader, Morpheus, basically ran a propaganda campaign for the Master. If you ask him about it, Morpheus says,
"The children of the cathedral hospitals provide the best care in all of this blasted, torn land. This care is vital to the Unity."
And about the Unity itself, he says,
"The Unity is our search for a higher level of life and unity with our fellow man."
Strangely enough, he's against calling the Master his master and will even yell at you.
"I do not have a master, you imbecile. No one controls me. He and I are partners."
Now just really quick, I just want to mention that again. Notice that Morpheus has no problem with the Unity being his god or whatever, but if you say that the Master is his master, he not only says that they are different entities, but that he respects one and not the other. Interesting. Anyway, the Master, however it breaks down, was now officially a force to be reckoned with. Almost a nation to their own. They had an extremely efficient military force on one side, and a kind of embassy or diplomatic wing with his human followers. They were a government of their own and was rapidly gaining influence and land. The final ingredient to the Master themselves was yet to come. As their super mutants moved out on patrol, they ran into a caravan from a place called the Los Angeles Vault, which was built as a demonstration for vault tech, but it still functioned as a full vault. In 2155, the Master took their final form by moving his mutated, giant, and ever-growing body into the Los Angeles Vault, assimilating those computers and creating a kind of headquarters across the entire facility. By this point, the mutilated body conglomerate of the Unity was so large it filled a huge portion of the vault and was about 1/2 the size of your mom. The surface was built into a church called the Cathedral, which would act as the facade for the church the cultists would use as the headquarters for all the Master's human slaves. It was there that Morpheus can be found. In addition to adding massive amounts of information, by combining the Unity to the Vault's computer, Unity found something they had been painstakingly combing the wasteland for. Inside the Los Angeles Demonstration Vault, there was a list of vaults along with their locations. Each one would be full of humans who had never been exposed to the radioactive FEV that permeated the surface since the war. The number of prime supermutants had gotten large enough that the Master started to divide them into groups, officially creating a special forces unit called the Nightkin, who received their orders mind to mind directly from the Master themselves. And not just by way of vague thoughts from the Unity, the Nightkin used a stealth field technology to be invisible much of the time, so they could watch everyone's actions. That, plus the fact that their mind was literally connected to Unity, means that Unity was a little bit omniscient, meaning he was everywhere at once, or they were everywhere at once. He was the kind of omniscient god that Santa Claus could only dream of being. At some point, the Master became so powerful that the psychic field around their body in the control room of the Los Angeles Vault would kill anyone who approached unbidden without special equipment that could protect their mind from Unity's psychic powers. In other words, Unity could be everywhere, see and hear everything, and being in its presence would kill you. It's clear what Interplay used as an inspiration for this character.
And his name is John C.
In addition to the Nightkin, Unity had at least one other military group. They trusted the Mariposa military base to their right hand, the lieutenant that I mentioned earlier. This was Unity's first perfect supermutant besides Richard. And you can tell that it thinks it's very smart because it adopted a British accent. They say they're
Better, more than human. I too was once human. Like you, I was a slug wallowing in the mud before being exposed to FEV and undergoing my glorious transformation.
And also, like every Brit I know, they seem to delight in being insulting. They're happy to share things about Unity's plans since they're a part of it.
Your human mind is rather under-equipped to handle this, so a simple yes will suffice for now. Soon, everyone in the world will be converted, and peace will reign. No war and no sickness. All super mutants are bound by the Unity. We are the hope for the world.
So now it's time for things to get meta. In Fallout 1, which was made in 1997, for your information, don't make fun of the ugly characters, okay? The player character leaves their vault in 2161 in search of a way to repair their failing vault water system. In order to successfully end the game with a win, you would, with the help of the Brotherhood of Steel, have to either blow up the Master and their vault, along with the Mariposa military base, and the Lieutenant, yourself, or convince them that their plan is flawed, so they do it themselves. By this point, when you meet the Master, they want to assimilate the world into Unity, eventually. In their flawless logic, there would be no war, no fighting. Instead, everyone would work together for a higher purpose, indirectly as unevolved humans working for Unity, or as an evolved super mutant that is a part of the Unity's consciousness. One thing I have mentioned is that the process brought on by contact with FEV is sterility, meaning, after you went through the painful process of being forced to evolve, you would not keep your gender or your nads. In addition to the issues with robbing an individual of an aspect of who they are, this meant they could not reproduce to make more super mutants without people. Just like Ellen DeGeneres, they could not achieve their final form without literally consuming a human being. So, if we look at the Master's plan, it probably looks something like this. Phase 1, assimilate enough super mutants to be a force in the wasteland. Check. Phase 2, assimilate entire cities to remove enemies from the population. Check. Phase 3, assimilate entire vaults to amass the largest army of super mutants ever. This is where we are. And then after this, Phase 4 would be assimilate the entire state with your newfound army, adding more members where needed, and Phase 5, remove all enemies. And then I guess sometime in the future after that, Phase 6 would be allow the humans who are not lucky enough to be assimilated to die out by way of old age, and Unity rules in the world in peace, rebuilding everything. Except the penultimate point could not be achieved. I mentioned earlier that Maxon's Brotherhood of Steel is arguably the de facto heroes of all Fallout. In Fallout 1, this is more explicit. If you work together with the Brotherhood, you can work together with the head scribe, Vree, who tells you,
all the mutants I've studied have been sterile. They can't breed with another creature. If we could clean up the mutation sources, we should be able to simply outlive the mutants.
And she can even give you the proof.
Here, take this holodisk. It's got copies of my autopsies on mutant corpses. It clearly shows that no mutant could possibly reproduce successfully.
Super mutants seem to be immune to dying from natural causes, but they would be doomed to live in a world that slowly aged around them, never shifting to a peaceful society. Like an aged Catwoman or a young incel, there would be no reason for them to continue living. They would never have a family of their own. The West Tech researchers never envisioned super mutants as anything besides soldiers or a means to an end, so the mutations brought on by FEV could never turn them into anything but a soldier or a means to an end. And so the player arrives. It's a little bit of a chore to get all the information from all the sources I have mentioned, but if you do, you go to the Master, the Unity, and Richard Gray. And they don't waste any time. They simply ask,
so what shall it be? Do you join the Unity, or do you die here?
Join. Die. Join. Die.
And then they even try to convince you. They're a lot more persuasive than their lieutenant, probably because they don't force you to listen to a disgusting accent. I mean, even though they speak to you using the voice of two different men, a woman, and a computer, at least none of them are British. Anyway, they say,
of course.
Mutants are best equipped to deal with the world today.
Who else?
The ghouls?
Please.
Normals?
They brought nuclear death to us all. This will be the age of mutants. Mutants.
They go on to try and make the argument that they won't be using violence except on people who deserve it. If you say some people don't want to be assimilated, they say,
Of course not. Most will be offered a chance to become a mutant.
Those who deny this
opportunity
will be sterilized and
let go. Those that resist will be
executed.
All that
resist?
Yes. And all those that are required for the
unity
as well. The remainder will be allowed to live out their days, but under
unity, control,
and protection.
But none shall breed, for they will be the last of their race.
As peaceful as all that sounds, the Unity is able to be convinced, like I said before. If you did all the work and brought the holodisc from Vree, the Master will demand proof that the mutants are sterile. And if you can present it, then they'll say,
I must digest this information. One moment. I understand now. You made a clever forgery. You made this up to fool me.
Fool
me!
But eventually they do come to their senses and calls out telepathically to their scientists so they can check what you just told them.
Reasonable. One moment. Are you sure? What about the other?
Females.
It cannot be.
Yeah.
But it cannot be. This would mean that
all my work
has been for nothing. Everything that I've tried to...
A failure!
It can't be. I don't think that I can continue to have done the things I have done in the name of progress and healing. It was madness. I can see that now. Madness. There is no hope. Leave now. Leave while you still have
hope.
And with that, the Master will arm a nuke they keep for a rainy day and take the Los Angeles Vault, the cathedral, and all the followers inside with them. Now, why is this important? Why can't you just enjoy the games, enjoy the show without understanding the Master and their army of super mutants? Well, there's a lot of yada-yada-ing in Fallout about why the world is the way it is, but the real reason is here, beginning at the West Tech facility and moving it to the Mariposa military base. FEV may have started here, but it was moved to all the locations in all the games. In fact, each game goes through explicit detail to tell you how the FEV got in the area and what effect it had on the local flora and fauna. I plan to get to every single one of those stories, one by one. But in the meantime, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Unless you're British, then don't watch. Please, don't like the video. I would hate that. If you subscribe, I expect a check in the mail. Sorry, I don't make the rules. I need to make a living. Anyway, have a good week, and I'll see you next Friday when I post the full story of the Brotherhood of Steel, starting where we left off in this video.